It is being called a battle for the soul of the Republican Party. In the wake of the Trump presidency, there's a stark divide facing the GOP. So, where does it go from here? Dr. Mark Caleb Smith is Director of the Science for Political Studies and Professor of Political Science at Cedarville University. He's an expert in American politics, campaigns and elections, and constitutional law. Dr. Smith, thanks so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be with you.
Let's get right into it. There is a great divide, and it's a high stakes battle in the party, and it doesn't appear that they are moving past it, even after Donald Trump's acquittal in the Senate impeachment trial. Historically, how much sway does a past president hold over his party?
It's significant. I mean, it's always significant. I mean, former presidents just don't come a dime a dozen. There aren't that many living presidents that are still with us, for example. And the ones that are, when they speak, we listen to them, whether we agree with them or not. But it is a little bit different when you've lost your last election. Think more like Jimmy Carter or George Herbert Walker Bush, and they lost their chance to get reelected. And I think their profile was diminished in their parties to some extent because of that loss. I think President Trump's profile is diminished as well because of this most recent defeat that he suffered. But he's making noises of running again, whereas Jimmy Carter and George Herbert Walker Bush really weren't actively thinking about running again at that point. And so it's definitely a different dynamic. Presidents, ex-presidents matter. They clearly matter. People are going to listen to them. They're always going to get convention slots to speak, for example. And so they make a difference. How much of a difference? It really does depend.
Well, the very controversial Marjorie Taylor Greene has said the party is now President Trump's, yet in a secret ballot, Liz Cheney easily held her leadership position, despite the fact she voted for Trump's impeachment. So, what does this all say about the current state of the party?
I think in some ways that's the $1 million question confronting us as we observe the Republican Party moving forward. If we look at polling, it clearly does still look like President Trump's party. I mean, he gets 80+% approval rating still within the Republican Party, and that's significant. If that declines in the near term, then maybe we'll start speaking different language to some extent. It's different, though, I think, when you talk about the elites of the party, not just voters, but office holders, donors, longtime so-called establishment figures. I think they're much more divided over President Trump than probably the average Republican voter is divided. Now, you don't want to read too much into this sort of thing, but we've been reading interviews for 5 years now of off-the-record Republicans who are sitting in Congress, who refuse to go on the record, who consistently say things like, well, I'm really embarrassed about all this, or I can't believe that our party is supporting Donald Trump. And, there's always sort of this behind-the-scenes angst that doesn't always show up in public when it comes to members of Congress, for example. I do think that that Liz Cheney vote is significant. I really thought there's a good chance she was going to lose that vote and lose that leadership position, but she won it pretty decisively. And so I think that's a pretty good indicator that you see a severe division at the elite level, maybe not quite as much division at the rank and file voter level. How those things resolve moving forward is going to be really interesting to see.
So, do you think we might have seen a different result if the trial had been by secret ballot?
I think you would have. I really do. Now, I don't know if that would have been enough to convict and remove the president or bar him from running for future office necessarily, but I do think you'd have seen more senators in the Republican Party vote against Mr. Trump. There's no question that right now the dominant force in the GOP is some level of fear over President Trump's supporters. It is a significant amount of attachment they have to the president, and it doesn't appear to be diminishing. So, no, I think a secret ballot would have yielded different results. But of course, a secret ballot runs counter to who we are as a country, right? And so we always want these votes to be on the record. And I think we want them that way for a reason. But yeah, I think you're right. It highlights some key divisions.
While the Republican Party historically stood for fiscal responsibility, law and order, conservative social values, among others, does the party have a platform to govern? What does it mean to be Republican today?
As a political scientist, that's a great question, and it's one that we really won't be able to answer well until we see another few election cycles play out. Right now, I will say it feels like the definition of a Republican is up for grabs. It's felt like that for probably at least the last 5 years, maybe a little bit longer. Right now, I think you could even argue that the term conservative is up for grabs. As you indicated in your question, conservatism has generally meant in recent American history small government, constitutionalism, law and order, reduced government spending, reduced welfare state. Well, those things really aren't defining the Republican Party at the moment, for sure. Will that be the case in 2 years, 4 years, 8 years? That's what we really want to see. Now, I'll just speak personally as someone who grew up in a very Republican household, who grew up in a very Republican state. All of this does feel pretty topsy-turvy to me. The Republican Party has definitely moved significantly. You might argue that it's moved in a good direction in terms of capturing voters. If you can appeal to those white voters, especially white voters who don't have a college degree, for example, who still make up a huge percentage of our population, then that maybe puts you in a better position moving forward. But how do you resolve that with those other elements of the party that used to be there? That's what we really can't see right now.
Well, as the days and weeks have passed since the siege on the Capitol, 140,000 Republicans have left the party. Many in the party initially said Trump should be held accountable, but backed down as evidenced by the vote to acquit. Looking at the case the House managers put forth, will this trial have any impact? Trump says he will continue to be a political force, as you said. What are the chances that we'll see him run again as a Republican?
I think that the House managers, I think they put forward an interesting case, but I think that it was really miscalculated from the beginning. I think tying the case to incitement was really a mistake. They should have connected it more to maybe the subversion of the electoral system. Maybe it was connected to the president's oath of office, his inability to execute the law, for example. Those would have made better charges. However, I'm not naive enough to think that the charges would have affected the vote outcome. I think the Republicans clearly were angling to acquit the president. And in that sense, it didn't surprise me at all when we saw the final result. President Trump is going to go down as the only president impeached twice. It's the most bipartisan vote we've ever seen, even though he wasn't removed or barred from running in the future. And I think that it does affect him. I think that it affects those slivers of the party that aren't necessarily sold on President Trump, voted for him because they felt like he was the best choice. I think now he's even more damage to those kinds of folks. He can recover. He still has a significant presence. He can recover. And I still think in 4 years, there's a reasonable chance he'll be running for president again.
Well, the electoral system is set up for a two-party system. Donald Trump suggested that he would create the Patriot Party. Now there's another faction wanting to start the Conservative Party. Any chance we will see any of this come to fruition? And if so, what does that mean for the right?
Isn't it incredible? If we'd had this conversation 5 years ago or 10 years ago, those questions would have been unimaginable. I think there's a reasonable chance you will see a splinter movement develop, whether it is a movement of supporters for President Trump who leave the GOP or a movement of former Republicans who want to found a more traditional party. I think there's a reasonable chance that will happen. I will say, though, third parties in American history fail, and they generally fail pretty spectacularly. If they're successful, it's in the short term, and usually they're built around a personality. They're built around a person that they can weld themselves to, whether it's Teddy Roosevelt and the Bull Moose Party, whether it's Ross Perot and the Reform Party. When we've seen these kind of third-party movements emerge, they can be effective in a very short-term sense, and they can have an impact on the election cycle. But beyond that, they really tend to struggle. So, yeah, I think there's a chance you're going to see a movement take place, but I think there's a very little chance that you're going to see it have a lasting impact. All that to say, though, the Republican Party was a third party, right? It came out of nowhere effectively and became a major party. And so it isn't as if it's unprecedented in American history for major parties to die and for other parties to take their place. As someone who studies this for a living, we tend to see cycles when we look at partisan history in the United States of America. And it feels like, based on the historical evidence, we're due for a significant shakeup in the party system. That doesn't mean one party is going to die necessarily, but we're probably looking at this moment where we're seeing a lot of churn within the political parties, sort of a shuffling of the deck, so to speak, of the voters within the parties. And I think whatever we see in the next 4 years is going to be different, significantly different. Whether that's a third party, whether that's a revolutionized Republican Party, I don't know for sure. But I think we are seeing significant change right now.
Wow, so given all of that, where does the party go from here? What do they need to do to be successful moving forward? Is a coalition the answer?
You know, it's really hard. Again, I'm kind of paid, and I make a living being an objective, try to be objective and a detached observer. Um, I think right now, just looking at this in a disinterested way, I think right now this is President Trump's party. I think the party has changed significantly in the last 5 years, and I don't have a feeling that that's changing in the near term. I think it has oriented itself around a different set of issues. It's a much more of a nationalist party. It's much more of an engaging party when it comes to the economy. It's much more a populist party in a lot of ways. And I don't think that's necessarily going to go away. That could be good for the party politically in terms of just attracting voters. But I think you're going to see a void in the party system. You're going to see a lot of changing taking place because you don't have this typical conservative, progressive divide that we've seen really for the last almost 100 years within our party system. And so moving forward, when you just look at the crystal ball, I think President Trump is in a really powerful position. Of course, there are people like Senator Sass, like Senator Romney, and others that you can tell are pushing against this pretty significantly. How many of them are there pushing against? How many voters are willing to push along with them? How many donors, maybe that's the most important question, are willing to push along with them against this rise of President Trump within the party? Whenever a party loses a presidential election, there's always this period of sort of second guessing. What did we do wrong? How can we fix ourselves? And so this is normal in that sense, but it feels like the scale of this is so much bigger that I think you really are looking at significant change happening, as I said before.
Well, there's a big question that remains in the minds of millions of Americans. Was January 6th a conclusion or was it a preview? Can you speculate?
I think had Congress impeached the president on, say, January 7th or January 8th, and had a vote taken place and a trial taken place within a few days, I think there's a reasonable chance he would have been removed and would have been barred from holding future office right then. Because I think Congress was running at such a hot temperature at that point. There was still so much fear and so much anger within the institution of Congress that would have changed things dramatically. Those several weeks of delay, though, allowed constituents to weigh in, allowed pressure to be brought to bear against members of the House and members of the Senate, and they realized that they really had limited options if they wanted to hold on to their seats for the future. To me, that says that what we saw on January 6th really didn't end President Trump's role in American politics. It just ended a particular chapter of his role. Whether he's going to be holding office again in the future, whether maybe it's his children holding office or his designated supporters or surrogates holding office in the future, I think he's around for quite a while. Now, one of the interesting things, you normally see a vice president sort of leap to the front of the line here and be kind of a standard bearer. You get the sense that that relationship has soured pretty dramatically between President Trump and Vice President Pence, and particularly in President Trump's followers and Vice President Pence. And so if it isn't Trump leading into the future, it's a little hard to tell who else it might be, at least within that Trump movement.
Well, this struggle will be playing out on many fronts, and we will continue to watch. Dr. Smith, thank you so much for taking some time to share your perspective with NewsPoint 360.
Thank you.